It's my pleasure to welcome our speaker for today's Mailman Center Grand Rounds, Dr. Ron Prinz. Dr. Prinz is a distinguished professor at the University of South Carolina and co-director of the Research Center for Child Wellbeing. Um, he did his undergraduate work in California at UCLA and UC Berkeley, and then went coast to coast and did his PhD at Stony Brook in New York. Um, Dr. Prince is the founding editor of the Clinical Child and Family Psychology Review, been, I think, for 25 years or so. And his research is focused on parenting and family issues, generally speaking, but he's also taken a population-based approach to the prevention of child maltreatment, as well as child behavioral and emotional problems. I first became aware of Dr. Prince's work when I was in graduate school in 1979. And I still use, Ron, your paper published in the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis on the assessment of conflict in parent-teen dyads. And the conflict behavior questionnaire, I find one of the most useful clinical instruments in my clinical work. But what I think it's fair to say Dr. Prinz's work is very well known for, besides that, is the population level approach he's taken in his work, and in particular, his evaluations of triple P programs at a population level, looking at outcomes measured at the population level. 2009 article in Prevention Science is exemplary of that approach. So today he's going to talk on population versus traditional approaches to parenting-based intervention. What's the difference? Dr. Prinz.
Okay, let me get going here. First of all, thank you very much, Alan. I didn't know that my work when I was 6 years old was something that you read, but
Right.
thank you very
You
much.
were always precocious, Ron.
Yeah, when I tell students that I've been here 45 years, they go, "Wow," and I said, "Yeah, I started when I was 13." So I'm pleased to. I wish I were down there with you, but I'm nevertheless pleased to be with all of you. And I'm gonna focus on two facets of parenting-based prevention and intervention research that the traditional one is what we're all used to doing, but I'm going to contrast that with the population approach, and both from a research and a programmatic standpoint, discuss some of the variations, the difference between those two, and why that difference is important. So let me go here. Okay, so I don't think this group will need convincing that society sorely needs cogent parenting support. And to reaffirm that, this year the U.S. Surgeon General issued an advisory on the mental health and well-being of parents. Now, I think we've known this for a long time, but he made it an official proclamation. But embedded in that, which is not in the title, you can't see that, is it's a lot about parenting, not just the well-being of the parents. And their parenting affects their children and affects them and the extended family and the people around them. So, and their mental health and well-being affects their parenting too. So we know from our work that that's true. And so we have to keep building the quality of the work. Now, population and traditional approaches, which I'll define in a minute, are both needed. The scientific methods and the programming involved in each go hand in hand, and they're both relevant to this discussion. I'm probably going to lean a little bit more heavily on the scientific side, but embedded in that is a knowledge of what are you trying to test and how does it work. And I'm gonna take two studies which shared in common a particular parenting program, in this case, Triple P, and the two studies represent examples of population and traditional approach, but they both use a variation of the same intervention, which makes it more apples and apples. Okay, I just pressed advance and nothing happened. Okay, there we go. All right, so in terms of parenting support strategies, the traditional approach that all of us have been trained in what we do is it's either treatment or prevention, typically not both, or it could be a combination, but serving families individually or in small groups, and we focus on each child and parent's outcome, and the studies typically, with rare exception, involve relatively small samples, powered enough to answer the question, but not huge. And we're able to measure process and outcomes with each family. So that's what we're pretty much all familiar with in the traditional approach. The population approach, on the other hand, is primarily prevention, or a broad array of interventions that could include prevention and treatment, serving many families via multiple modalities, and the focus is on prevalence and collective outcomes, and by necessity requires large samples and whole communities. We can measure community process and collective outcomes. So let me give the rationales, some of the rationales for a population approach to parenting support. First of all, we know that there are widespread parenting issues, a la the Surgeon General, that affect much of society. Child Protective Services records grossly underestimate problematic parenting. We know that. But nonetheless, on top of it all, significant portions of the population, whether they call attention to it or not, are struggling with parenting challenges. A population approach has the potential to normalize and destigmatize the improvement of parenting, particularly if it's done in a way that implies, well, everybody can benefit from this. It's not for only the people who are child abuse prone or something like that, or people in poverty. It can go across the economic levels, and we can derive multiple benefits when we do a population approach from a parenting support strategy with the same intervention. We don't have to work on this problem separately and this other problem. We can work on prevention of child maltreatment, on prevention of children's early behavioral and emotional problems, on increasing readiness at school entry, reducing risk for later adverse outcomes, academic, substance use, delinquency, and you could probably come up with several others here. And when you're making parenting support broadly available, you're potentially touching many areas at the same time instead of having to have separate initiatives on each thing. And you might be able to induce positive contagion effects, that if lots of parents are exposed to things that are beneficial, they'll share it with other parents. Okay, rationales for the traditional approach, because we need that approach too, in terms of parenting support. We can test a specific parenting intervention. We can look at efficacy with particular parent-child challenges. We can improve the effectiveness relative to implementation, to process, to developing boosters, etc. We can establish the intervention viability and validity before trying to expand to the population. We can do things with this kind of approach to more intensively study the intervention in terms of process measures. We can do all kinds of assessments, including behavioral observation, and we can look at mediation and moderation. So let me describe study one first. And I'm going to go back and forth between these two studies and then start drawing comparisons. So study one represents the population approach, and the goal of this particular study was to reduce the prevalence of child maltreatment using a strategy of community-wide dissemination of an evidence-based system of parenting support. And in fact, that was using all levels of the triple P positive parenting program system. Study 2, a traditional approach, the goal is to improve the behavior of children with disruptive behavior problems, young children, not adolescents. And the strategy was to implement an online self-administered, not online e-health, online self-administered parenting intervention, and it used the level 4 of the triple P positive parenting program system. So for those of you not as well familiar with some of the background about triple P, it's really an evidence-based system, not just a single intervention, of parenting support interventions and programs. And it was developed by Matt Sanders and colleagues at the University of Queensland. It was designed to build towards population-wide impact, but the various components can be used in lots of different settings and situations. So it's not only useful for population application, and it has multi-tiered levels of increasing program intensity. It serves multiple purposes, including not limited to prevention of child maltreatment, intervention for behavioral and mental health problems, promotion of school readiness, dealing with special needs populations, developmental disabilities, and so on. And so here's just the pyramid where the bottom level is a communication strategy using media and various things without involving any individual parent or family. And as you move up, the intensity and the dosage, if you want to call it that, gets more intense. But the pyramid is meant to imply that the base, where there's media, that's where you can involve the whole population, the whole community. As you move up, it doesn't make sense to take your most intensive intervention and give that to a huge proportion of your population, because very few parents need that relative to the number of parents who can benefit from all the other levels. And so that's why it's shaped in a pyramid. Okay, so let's talk about research design, the two studies. So study 1 was a place randomization design where a place was a county, and there were 18 medium-sized counties. 9 counties got randomized to receive the triple P system, and I'll talk later about what that actually means. And 9 counties just did their business as usual, and there were in the population in those 18 counties, because we were focused on the terms of outcomes on the sort of the toddler, I would say birth, but 1-year-olds to 8-year-olds population for looking at child maltreatment. But what we were disseminating could be used by parents with a 9-year-old or a 10-year-old, 11. But we just, in terms of outcome, we were very interested in 8 and below in terms of child maltreatment. So that's study 1. Let me mention one other thing about study 1. I've done a lot of RCTs and individual sample studies where you have to have the family's consent, and there's all kinds of human subject things. For a place randomization design where individuals weren't recruited, I went around to the different counties with a consent form, and I would bump into a building here and a building there and ask them to sign the consent form. I never could get a building or the county itself to sign. I didn't have to go through human subjects because I was not recruiting anybody into the actual study. It was all about disseminating in counties. And I recommend that to everybody who gets tired of human subject issues. Do that, do a place randomization thing, and you can make your life so much easier. Okay, study 2. It was randomized trial, but it was a non-inferiority design, which before I did this study, I didn't even know what a non-inferiority design was. It's oftentimes used when you have a medication that's very successful, but may have a lot of side effects or it's very expensive, they'll come up with a second medication that they think might work well, but might improve on those other factors. And they'll see, is it non-inferior to the one that's already established? So in this case, we knew there were lots of studies about staff delivered, the regular practitioner delivered standard triple P level 4 with families with children with disruptive behavior problems. And so that was our so-called established medication. That was our established intervention. And then we wanted to see, well, would the online version, well, of the same program, would it do as well? Not better. So you can't use the standard thing, okay, let's compare these and see if one does better than the other. It's, does it do as well as? And in a non-inferiority methodology, there's an additional set of statistical rules that you have to follow when you do that. It's not like, oh, there wasn't a significant difference, therefore the one intervention did as well as the other. If it was that easy, everybody could do a non-inferiority design. So implementation of the intervention. So in study 1, what this meant was we trained across the 9 counties, we trained 649 practitioners from all different sectors, from educational sector, from mental health, from not so much social services, because our state is so poorly funded in terms of social services that they're doing all their time investigating childbirth, and they don't do through social services. They don't do much of the programming. But we got a lot of the NGO groups and community centers, and we even trained some clergy who would do parenting support through the church and other things. So we had a very broad array of practitioners. And it was, so the families actually received programming from this array of practitioners in many different service sectors, but we never recruited any family. The study never recruited any family to be in the study. It was all about training the people to deliver, and then supporting them some from afar, and help, and when they run into problems, and adding more practitioners that need more training, and let them do their work with the families like they always would. And the quality control for fidelity was not about fidelity of delivery of the intervention to the families. It was about fidelity of the practitioner training. And we measured that and report on that. Study 2 is this is the traditional one. It's more what we're all familiar with. Families were recruited out of the community for the study trial. The online intervention, the parents would then receive an access code to the online program, and then they're off on their own unless they ran into we would give technical support. They could contact us, but we wouldn't give any programmatic support for them during that. Versus the staff delivered through the control condition, the parents received staff delivered programming at our research clinic, and we actually ran it we ran it in Oregon and we ran it in South Carolina. So we had a 2-site thing for both the online and the staff delivered. And then fidelity was the traditional thing of, okay, how you need to know that your staff delivered thing was delivered well, because if you want to compare the online, you need the high standard of the control condition in order to see, does your online come up to that level of quality in terms of outcome. So we would video record all of the sessions, so the staff never knew which ones we were going to do fidelity checking, and we sent those to our collaborator in Australia under Matt Sanders' supervision, where they would randomly select and assess the fidelity of those recordings. So main outcome measures for study 1, we had 3, just three very important ones. And these were the only outcome measures we were interested in. We thought if you could get change on one or more of these, then we were making a dent in prevalence. And obviously, the most obvious one is substantiated child maltreatment cases in the Child Protective Services system. In the Child Protective Services system, routinely in every county on a monthly basis, reported all that data to a state data warehouse, and we were able to get de-identified data over multiple years, county by county, and so that was a critical thing. Similarly, though, we also had out-of-home placement data from the foster care system reported in the same way, but independent of Child Protective Services. They ran their own data. And then the third system was the hospital system reporting of hospital-treated either emergency or inpatient for what appeared to be child maltreatment through the ICD codes. So it didn't have to be proven through social services that it was child maltreatment, but if it was recorded that way in the ICD system, that was enough, and we used that uniformly across all the counties. So those were three archival record measures. Study 2, the traditional, you'll probably be more familiar with this. We had observation of parent-child interaction. We had at pre, and then at post, and then at a 12-month follow. We had parent and child in a set of play tests, and we recorded that and had that independently evaluated by a team in Oregon that was really strong in family interaction observation. And we looked at both child disruptive behavior and parenting from those things. And then we also had parental report on the iBerg Child Behavior Inventory, of which I'm sure you all are familiar, on child behavior problems. So those were the main outcome measures. Okay, the types of results then for the population approach, study 1, it was county prevalence rates, and we're looking at the collective impact. For study 2, we're interested in individual child and parent functioning and the impact on each family. So that's just comparing the scope of the results. So study 1 results. So first of all, these counties varied in population size from 50 to 175,000. We picked, of the 42 counties in South Carolina, we threw out the little ones because they just didn't have enough child maltreatment. You know, they'd have one case a year, and we didn't know what that meant. So we knocked those off, and we wanted more to work with. And then we got rid of the 2 or 3 bigger counties, because they would swamp all the resources and be unequal. So we wanted these medium-sized counties, and there were plenty of those. And all of these counties, all 18, had never had triple-P programming of any kind. We couldn't do that now because triple-P is more widely disseminated, but then we had a lot of naive pigeons at that point in terms of counties. And the average population size of these counties was about 97,000. In all 18 counties combined, that at any one time, because it's a moving target as children and families progress developmentally, there were approximately 170,000 families with at least one child under age 8 or under. 27% of the children in these 18 counties were living in poverty, and here's the approximate racial breakdown, predominantly Caucasian and Black. Here's the results from study 1. So there were significant prevention effects on all 3 archival record outcomes: child maltreatment, out-of-home placements, and hospital-treated injuries. And I'll just give you the graph on one just to show you, give you a sense of what that might look like. We used a baseline average of each outcome of each measure, taking the 5-year, just so we're not hitting some idiosyncratic thing with any one county or something. And you can see that the two conditions started out very similar on their 5-year average. And then the intervention counties, but after 2 years of exposure of the intervention, showed a nice drop in rates of substantiated child maltreatment, while the control counties went up a little, and the rest of the counties, which are not here, besides the 18, were more like the control counties. In other words, there was sort of a general upward trend towards more maltreatment a little bit, and we were able to buck that trend with these 9 randomly assigned counties. And similar kind of things happened with the other 2 measures. I think even on one of them, the lines crossed. They're not exactly the same, because you're talking about different parts of the population in terms of these indices, and so they're not completely overlapping. But they all showed clearly significant. With you had to have a whopping effect size when you only have 18 units to analyze. It's not like having 100 families in another kind of study. In terms of a cost-benefit analysis, Washington State Institute for Public Policy determined that in this context, there was probably a $9 return in terms of projection of the economic benefits for every dollar invested in doing this thing. So at least from a policy standpoint, as well as a humanities standpoint, this was clearly a smart strategy, and other places around the world recognize this, but they don't always implement the way you need to. But this shows on a first effort that you could get something like that. Okay, now study 2 results. This was over 300 families, more boys than girls, not surprisingly, ages 3 to 7. But they were all above the clinical cutoff on the iBerg. And here's the proportion of races. About a little more than half the sample was college graduates among the parents, but they varied from just a high school thing, from a little bit of community college. So we had pretty good variation on economic and educational levels. So let me move on here. So here's the results. So the null hypothesis is that the online delivered intervention is inferior to the staff delivered. And this is the opposite of what we're used to. In a superiority, which is what the superiority design, which is what most of our RCTs are, we start with, well, our intervention and control, the null hypothesis is that they came out the same. And then we try to reject that in favor of the intervention group did better than the control. It's the opposite, that you start with, well, your new intervention is going to be inferior unless you can prove otherwise. And there's what's called a non-inferiority margin. In this case, it was 0.28 standard deviation for each of the outcome variables. And we had an alpha of 0.05. And essentially, I'm giving you some of the results. For the 12-month follow-up results, which I think are the most important, we demonstrated that there was non-inferiority for observed child disruptive behavior, parent-reported child problems, observed positive parenting, observed aversive parenting, observed overall quality of parent-child relationship in those interaction sessions. So it was pretty convincing that the online thing worked as well in producing outcomes. And in terms of other results that we found, is that we had high fidelity, which you need in order to be able to claim that your new intervention is up against the gold standard. So we had very high fidelity there on content, but also on process. Those are the two domains of fidelity. And we did a cost minimization analysis led by a health economist who previously worked at CDC and was at University of Georgia when she helped design this. And we found that, yeah, it's not surprising, online interventions where there's no staff delivering, it's going to be cheaper. The question is how much cheaper? And this takes into account, this cost analysis takes into account family time, family out-of-pocket expenses like driving, like having to pay for childcare, whatever, time off from work, that doesn't happen very often, as well as staff. Now, obviously, the biggest expense for the staff-delivered intervention is staff and facilities and so on. And the biggest expense on the online delivery program is not the online program. That was pretty cheap. It was families, the parents' time. And parents' time is accounted for in both of these things. So you could say if you ignore the time that parents have to invest in it, it's even a greater difference in cost. So the online intervention, to summarize, was as good in producing outcomes, in child and parent outcomes, as the staff-delivered one, but at a considerably less funds, and of course, not having to hire people. Now, let's talk about the advantages and limitations of the population approach. So let's talk about the advantages first. Obviously, with that kind of approach, you can assess prevalence changes, which is sort of one of the major points of doing the population thing to start with. And you can evaluate whole systems, not just single components or single interventions. You're looking for more of a holistic effect. And in this particular study, individual families are not randomized, and so the families are not constrained by the normal things we put families through in a standard RCT study. And that's from a public relations standpoint, that's an advantage. It creates flexibility for parents because unlike a study where you're recruiting people and testing them in a particular intervention, dosage level and component, whatever, they could move across the levels. They could start out with the level 2 and get referred and cross town and get the level 4 or 5 or and come in and out of the programming, which is more the natural way that services usually work when you're not forcing everything into a single trial. It allowed for, the population report allowed for going beyond individual families, for example, on community-wide media strategies. If you do community-wide strategy where you're trying to do an RCT to test an intervention, you'll mess up your control condition because they'll all get some of the things by media that could offset what you're testing. So those are the advantages, but there are limitations too. You cannot typically do rigorous assessments on all the individual families who happen to participate in your population program. It's not practical, but they're not part of a study, and why should they give you data for that? But it's just not practical anyway. You're not able to examine, for example, family level mediation. And now at a more macro level, it's not clear what population penetration is needed to achieve prevalence impact. And to do a population approach, it requires population measurement systems. And so that's pretty hard to do a population study if you have no way to measure the outcomes. Okay, so now let's look at the advantages and limitations of a traditional approach. The advantages are obviously precise measurement of intervention and effects, able to study intervention impact on specific problems and specific family groups, easier to employ multimodal measures, including observational things that are more intensive and expensive, and you can systematically study dosage or other variations. In terms of limitations, you cannot extrapolate to population impact. People try, they say, well, I took these 200 families and I was able to reduce the likelihood that they would have child maltreatment episodes or have a relapse if they already had problems. And therefore I can take a couple hundred families or 100 families, and I can say, oh, well, this is what would happen at a population level. Doesn't work. And so, in fact, very few child maltreatment studies have actually tried to systematically change the prevalence rate of child maltreatment. They've claimed to want to do that, but they're just not, they can't do it with the traditional methodology. It just doesn't work. Parents are constrained by being part of a randomized trial, which forces standardized implementation and may keep some parents who need the kind of service you're offering from even signing up. And so you may get you may have an external validity problem. To whom can we generalize these results? Only to families that are willing to put themselves through an RCT. And it's not possible typically, maybe with some creativity, but it's typically not possible to implement stop and go and mix programming options because you undo your randomization, or you only have so many degrees of freedom in what you can do. So you got to focus in on one or two things, and you can't allow people to go in multiple directions. Whereas in the population trial, you don't worry about that at all. Okay, so I'm going to wind up now and try to get to questions and comments. So some research and program directions. First of all, these two approaches are not at odds with each other. They go hand in hand. Traditional parenting support studies contribute interventions to population programming, because all of the triple P things that were put in the population trial had all been previously tested in lots of randomized and quasi-randomized studies. And the traditional approach can reveal implementation strategies that might enhance population strategies. Population studies, on the other hand, sometimes identify gaps in intervention targets or specific parent needs, and they might stimulate intervention development followed by traditional studies to address specific things that come out that get identified. Both are needed. As I'm sort of alluded to earlier, the prevalence of child maltreatment will not be conquered focusing exclusively on very small slices of the community, right? And for treatment, traditional approach is essential before disseminating broadly to treatment settings. Take a look at the DARE program years ago. They went to scale, and the U.S. government invested billions, but there wasn't some initial test to know whether it even had any efficacy to start with. So you don't go to a population approach with things that haven't been tested. Future needs, we need better population measures, particularly for child mental health. We got pretty good ones for child maltreatment, but not for child mental health. We need creative control group conditions for RCTs, because just from a public relations standpoint, parents who are needing help need to get something. And so we have to be inventive there on the control side. There's a need for hybrid studies that combine population and traditional and targeted components, that you integrate them into some more comprehensive kinds of approaches. On that note, here's some references, and I will take questions.
Thank you very much, Ron. Fantastic talk, and I think a terrific example of how to go about doing research at the population level. I did have a question while others are thinking about your questions. I'm going to go ahead and ask you one that occurred to me when you were describing the results in study one in particular. And the first thing that came to my mind was how many families are you reaching in study one? And that kind of gives us an idea about dose, right? Dose impact on the community. You obviously got a whopping effect size. 1.61 is amazing, really. And you showed real changes in these community level indicators or indicators of outcome at the community level. So you referred to that actually as population penetration later.
Right.
So can you give us an idea about, I mean, you said there were several hundred, I think 300 or so people were trained at various levels,
600 and
various
something.
600 and so.
Yeah.
So like how many families did they reach? And were they
Okay.
doing
So
level one, level two, level three? What were they doing?
So I should mention, because we were babes in the woods when we first did the study, and we partnered with CDC was the funder, and it was a not it was a cooperative agreement. So we had CDC people coming frequently, and we collaborate with them, and so we're all trying to learn how do you do this kind of a study because there's so little in the child, and definitely not in the parenting area. You can't find a model. So the issue was, how do you, with the practitioners you trained, how do you find out how many families they're serving
Yeah.
without being too overbearing and intrusive, right? And so what we did was we created a longitudinal follow-up with practitioners. We had using telephone survey where not it wasn't email, and that was before email was so predominant as the data collection. But we would call them up and spend 5 minutes asking them a few questions. How many families did you serve in the last month and in the last year and things like that. And of course some practitioners did nothing and some did a huge amount and so on. So we were able to estimate that we think we'd have sort of a confidence interval of a lower and upper estimate. We think we got somewhere between 10 and 12% of the families, which is a lot, but or maybe it was 9 to 12 on average. And it varied a little bit by county in the 9 counties, but that was a pretty good estimate. Then separate from that, we hired John McCain's pollster at the time, who helped us do a population survey of parents to just see, did they even hear about triple P? I call it the awareness thing. You couldn't do outcomes that way because if you randomly select from the parents, the majority hadn't actually participated in triple P. And the parents who are more at risk for child maltreatment might not even have a phone or answer. This was back before cell phones really had predominated. So we found that about 20%, and we did it at the beginning and they never heard of it. And we went from almost zero to about 20% awareness in a random sample by the end of the study. So that suggests that this wasn't a figment of our imagination. People actually had heard about triple P and they actually participated in it to a reasonable amount. Now, would it be better to get an even higher penetration? Absolutely. And particularly with the lower levels and then online triple P now, we didn't have online triple P then, can be disseminated to thousands of people easily. So you would expect better penetration now because of the methods.
So if I remember right, you said there was about 170,000 families with kids up to 8 years old.
Right.
And so that means maybe if it was 10%, then you maybe had reached 17,000 families through these.
Not counting the media strategy.
Oh,
Because the media strategy
Oh, I forgot. What was the media strategy again? So,
It was we hired somebody who used to work at CNN, and we designed we didn't use TV because it bled across counties, but we used radio, which was county by county, and newspapers and newspaper articles and festivals and just sort of spread the word kind of stuff, but gave parenting tips. In the newspaper, we gave parenting tips that they didn't have to do an intervention. They could just read the newspaper and pick up some tips on things. Same thing with the radio stuff and so on. So we blitzed the 9 counties, which obviously accounted for the 20% awareness, but it also could have affected some parents without them actually going to a practitioner. We don't know, and that's something worth researching in its own right.
yeah, but you had impact. So, I mean, so I'm kind of just curious about how that occurred. And as you say, I mean, in Triple P, there's 5 levels, and maybe some of those families already kind of, self-selected themselves to get to their clergy or their school counselor or whoever was trained, and somehow they got
Right.
there. And it must have been among those 17,000 or so that, accounted for the reduction in maltreatment cases that were identified and so on. But I mean, I think it's a fantastic illustration of the potential of working to scale as you did in this study. Are
Sure.
there other questions? Anybody else things come to mind? Shout it out or put it in the chat. And the other thing that strikes me too is that, you included cost benefit analysis, which I think is so important. And it clearly, I mean, and even accounting for the time of parents that it takes to drive, to go, to just spend time in their online. What do you think of the implications of the non-inferiority of your online version of Triple P? Because these were clinically referred, these were families with kids who had
Right.
disruptive behavior disorder to
Right.
begin with. So, and it showed, I mean, how is that now, you think, being played out? Because it basically were equivalent.
They're equivalent. Now, I would say you get more attrition with the online
Hmm.
than the other. And we controlled for that in terms of once randomized, we did intent to treat analyses. We also did what's called per protocol analyses, where you take all the completers in both conditions and compare them. And either way, the non-inferiority came through. But if you take an online course that people can do on their own in any field around the world, the average completion is like 3%. With us, we got about 60%, I think, did the whole thing, and another 10 or 20 did enough so they got something out of it, but didn't finish it. So but you can afford more attrition than you can with the staff. With the staff delivered, you're investing so much money and resources, and so a dropout with the staff delivered is very costly to the
Hmm.
system. But with online, and if somebody starts the online, doesn't finish it, and this is why the system approach is so important, and then they can go pick it up later with I don't want to do it online, I want to go see a practitioner. If you give them choices, you're more likely to get a broader swath of the population.
So I just have a question.
Go ahead, Elana. Yeah.
I was just wondering, because do you feel that like we're running online groups with the Incredible Years, and we find, but I think it may be because it's facilitator led, that we have less attrition than with our in-person groups because it eliminates a lot of barriers for families. So do you think it was because it was like individual online and there wasn't like a facilitator or a group kind of cohesion element to it? Or what
So
the reason
in
was?
your example, you're talking about how the facilitator work with people, either in person or online, right? or
Right.
it's really not on, it's really through the internet or through the Zoom
And
or
Zoom,
whatever.
we're using Zoom. Yeah.
So online has a double meaning, right? In other words, that's what you're describing, I call that e-health, right? But what in our study, there was no facilitator, there was no
Right.
moderators. So that's the big issue, not, but we're doing here in some of our other studies in some other areas besides, including triple P, but we're doing individual internet, e-health facilitator with individuals, not with groups. With the group, tell me again, did you say that that was a group online?
Yes. Yeah. We offer both in person and through Zoom parenting groups using the Incredible Years curriculum. And, you know, I understand when it's just a course that the parent is taking on their own, that's different because you
Yeah,
don't,
right.
it's not completely up to them. We are actually finding that our online groups have less attrition than our in-person groups because it eliminates a lot of barriers for these parents. And if they have other commitments, they can still make that 2 hour.
And you don't have to provide childcare, and you don't have to
100%.
and they well, think of it as, for your kind of scenario, think of it as a 2x2, online versus in person, right?
Mhm.
And individual versus group, even though if you're not filling all 4 cells. And I
Right.
think it's an open question, and depends on the kind of population, kind of issues you're dealing with, and whether it's treatment or prevention, and the community that, their preference is the way to go. And they have to travel a long ways, it makes it harder. So I think the field needs to study those 4 quadrants with respect to attrition, with respect to satisfaction. And I suspect we're going to get more and more and more where we're not going to have a brick and mortar places anymore. It's all going to be done that way.
And so are you planning to look at any of those differences within Triple P or?
Maybe
curriculum?
some of the, there's many triple P researchers around the world. I bet you some people are asking that question. We haven't. We're the interventions we're doing for sleep and for families where there's multiple stressors in the family. There's a family life skills triple P now, which is it's a level 5 kind of thing. We're doing that online. I mean, with a facilitator individually. The other problem with groups, whether it's Zoom or in person, is you got to get everybody to adapt to the same time schedule.
100%.
And with our early career people, where they're having to do fast pilot projects, we don't want to make their life miserable trying to deal with these groups. Well, once you get a system down and people work on it well, then you can see, okay, how much do parents protect? And if they know they're going to miss out on a great service if they don't take advantage, and they're hurting from what they're experiencing with their child, maybe you can motivate them. But society's changing, and it doesn't always work the way we think it should work. So
Thank you. I was curious about your input on that.
yeah, that's a great question. How much more time do we have?
We have another 4 minutes. So you mentioned this was funded, the population study 1 was funded by CDC.
Right.
So I mean, for those of you thinking about doing research that can impact at the community level, the population level, you usually need pretty big grants to pull it off, right? So just curious, how many years was this project? Was it a 5-year effort?
Yeah, and then I think we had a follow-up period. But we originally went to NIDA, and actually NIDA recruited us, and they were considering it, and then they decided not to do it. And later I heard that they sort of were jealous that CDC got to do it. It's like, well, then you should have. The other study was NIMH, the online non-inferior, that was NIMH. So I've dealt with both agencies. It's very different, different research cultures.
Well, that was a fantastic presentation. I really appreciate your work and your presentation today. Ron Prince from University of South Carolina, thank you very, very much. I don't see any other, for those of you who want CE credits, please click on the link that was in the chat. And any final questions in the last 2-3 minutes? Okay.
Well, I can mention one other thing that in 1 minute, we didn't talk about racial and ethnic and cultural variations.
Oh, yeah.
That in the population study, a third of the practitioners were Black. And that would sort of match the percentage. And after training, we asked all the practitioners, what did you think about what you've now learned? You know, the triple P. And we found that the Black practitioners, and many of whom were parents themselves, liked triple P even stronger than the white practitioners. We were surprised by that. I mean, significantly so. Not, you know, the white practitioners didn't dislike it, but the satisfaction levels were higher for the, you know, and there's lots of things that can be done within triple P to embrace family variation within a racial group and between racial groups. You don't need a Black triple P and a white triple P. You need practitioners who know how to talk to different people, give examples, communicate well to different, and the parent chooses the goals in triple P, not the practitioner. So there's a chance for families. It's not just about racial and cultural differences, family differences. Each family knows what they want. And so there's something similar about family variation and racial variation. The parent needs to be in charge. So on that note,
excellent. Thanks so much. All right, everyone, have a great Friday and a great weekend. Thanks so much.